So the first part of our unit is about imperialism. And one of the things we're going to start off with is kind of the economics. And the goal of exports is when a country or business wants to sell goods to foreign nations. As we see from 1890 to 1920, this increases, which means the U.S. and the businesses are making a lot of money. This is a good thing for American businesses, workers, and the American government, because they're selling their goods and getting money in return. So what's the goals of an economy when you have an industrial nation? Well, you want to make sure you get access to natural resources, and you want to increase the amount of money that you get through exports or selling goods. So if you sell more goods than you buy, that's called a trade surplus, making money. So moving on, we'll look at a little timeline of American imperialism from about the late 1860s to around World War I, 1914. So the U.S. gets Hawaii from Russia, through buying it. Around 1899, the U.S. has a policy called the open door policy, because the U.S. wants to trade with China, keep those doors open to trade. There is another policy called the big stick diplomacy, and this is President Teddy Roosevelt's policy, so the United States is allowed to interfere in issues in Latin America. So the U.S. will get involved in Latin America a lot. Sometimes Latin Americans want this, many times they don't. But a year later, there's a war between the United States and Spain, in Cuba, and in the Philippines. And the United States wins this war, and as a result gains a lot of land. Some of the lands were Puerto Rico, the Philippines, which is in Asia, and Guam, which is also in the Pacific Ocean near Asia. The U.S. also creates the Panama Canal to help with trade and for the Navy. We'll look at that more closely as the unit goes on. Here we look at a giant map of the world. Half of the world, we got parts of Asia and North and South America. And the United States creates in a lot of these different lands military bases. And the reason was they wanted to protect resources in Asia, and so that they can refuel American ships for businesses and for the Navy. Again, the major goal for the United States at this time was access to China so that they could get cheap resources and trade, which is to sell their goods. They want to have more exports. So in the Spanish-American War, some of the causes or the reasons why the United States is going to go to war, the U.S. wants to expand its power. So the U.S. wants expansion. Something called yellow journalism. That's when newspapers would exaggerate or lie about the truth to motivate Americans to support imperialism. And there was a ship called the USS Maine that was sunk. Many blamed Spain for it, but there really was no evidence that Spain did it. So after this war, the United States wins, they beat Spain, and they get access to Puerto Rico and the Philippines. As a result of all this, many people now see America as a world power. A little different than when George Washington was president. So after the Spanish-American War, the Philippines fought against America for independence. We call this the American-Philippine War or the American-U.S.-Filipino War. As a result of this, over 200,000 Filipinos died fighting the American army, trying to get freedom. So here we see little propaganda in this cartoon where the U.S. is going to bring education and steel and all modern technology to the Philippines. And notice that Uncle Sam is looking forward, right? He really wants to get to China. He's using the Philippines as a stepping stone. And we see how sometimes foreigners are portrayed, non-Americans, where they exaggerate features and make them smaller. So again, Many of the areas that the United States gains, the territories they conquer, are either done or gained from war or through purchasing or buying. They bought this land from another power. Don't forget, the people living in these areas did not vote or ask for foreign influence. They were forced to by stronger armies and navies. Here we see in this political cartoon the open door policy, where the United States uses its power to force China to open its markets to American goods. So American businesses will sell products to China and as a result get money back from them. Here are some different viewpoints for imperialism and some reasons against imperialism. You could take a moment, read through this. I would pause the video and say which one do you agree with and why. Here we see a political cartoon with President Teddy Roosevelt, and this shows his big stick policy, okay, where the U.S. is going to have control and access to Latin America. He's not letting Europeans in. Only the American military and businesses can do business in Latin America. Many of the people in Latin America don't want America there. They want to keep their resources for themselves. But because the United States has a superior or stronger military, Latin America really has no choice. So now we're going to move to World War I, which starts in 1914. The United States doesn't get involved until about 1917. So there was a ship, the Lusitania, where some Americans were killed after Germany sank it. And there was something we'll look at about called the German Zimmermann Note. And this is where Germany asked Mexico, which is just south of the border, to attack America. And this made Americans angry. And we went from peace to war in this few years. Here's a quick little map of some of the different alliance systems in Europe. And notice the United States is allied with Great Britain, France, and Russia. So those are the sides that we helped during this war, giving them supplies and eventually sending American men over to fight. Here's just a small little reading that shows why the United States supported Great Britain and not Germany. Okay, there's some cultural and ethnic links there. So in this political cartoon, this is a type of propaganda where the artist exaggerates reality so that people would support their viewpoint. And in here this says, destroy this mad brute enlist. And this is trying to encourage particularly Americans to join the war effort. And that kind of ape-like creature they were trying to draw as Germany. And the innocent woman who was being taken advantage of was representing Britain and France. So we have to help our allies from the brutes, from the Germans. So they exaggerated some of that truth to get support. Now, an important term is called freedom of the seas, which says that trade ships were supposed to be protected. You should not be sinking them. Now, unfortunately, Germany did sink many of these trade ships. So this freedom of the seas was important to America. And on the Lusitania, which was supposed to be a passenger ship, they were hiding weapons going to Britain. So the United States was giving weapons to Britain and didn't tell the people on the ship. And then when Germany sank it, a lot of people were angry at Germany. This newspaper article talks about the Zimmermann Note, where Germany asked Mexico to attack the U.S. To raise money for the war, the U.S. government sold bonds. Basically what it was is you would give the government, let's say $10, and they would give you a piece of paper that says you would get $20 in about 15 to 20 years. So it was to raise money for the war. Congress passed the Espionage Act, And the Espionage Act had to deal with spying. So they made it illegal to interfere with military operations, including the draft. So if anybody tried to stop the draft or protest against it, they could get arrested. And one of those was Schenck, in the court case Schenck versus the U.S. He was arrested for trying to stop the war. In the Sedition Act, we've learned about that is when you say something negative about your government. So those laws are still in the books, and sometimes people get arrested for that. Okay, one of the major goals of President Wilson's 14 points was called the League of Nations, and the goal was to create peace and prevent another war. The United States does not join the League of Nations, and it stays a weak organization, and eventually we have World War II. At the end of the war, the Treaty of Versailles was created, and this blamed Germany for the war. And Germany had to pay reparations, which is war damages to the Allies. Because of these war reparations, Germany became poor, and eventually this led to the rise of Hitler in World War II. Here we see the post-war loans and debts. This is just the reparations, the repair money that Germany had to pay. And because it kept them in poverty, and it gave rise to really extreme leaders like Hitler, this is going to lead to World War II.